Hi, this is Mo Kiss from the Digital Analytics Power Hour. Today we have some bonus content for you on one of my absolute favourite topics, and that's privacy. We'll probably also lightly touch a little bit on GDPR given it's the hot topic of the moment. I brought in privacy expert Aurélie Poles to discuss this tricky topic. Welcome, Aurélie.
Thank you for having me, Mo.
Nice to see you again. Okay, so let me set the scene for our listeners. You and I have talked many a time about privacy, and I previously worked in government, and I often have reflected to you on how incredibly serious government agencies, in my experience, take compliance and privacy, and often more so, it seems, in private companies. And I guess you sort of helped me see the light during our discussions about some of the historic reasons in Europe for privacy. So would you mind covering some of that content for us as a bit of a starting off point?
Sure, I think, clearly European history following what happened during World War II, it's clear that European society has been influenced by what happened during World War II. And following that, in 1948, initiated actually in the United States by Eleanor Roosevelt, we saw the Declaration of Human Rights, which kind of started to define what is acceptable and what is not in terms of uses of data for scientific research, but also other positions related to responsibility and liability within wars. And from there, other international treaties have evolved, and certainly also in the 1970s, the discussions about census that you have possibly been aware of in Australia recently as well, brought about the creation of data protection authorities in France and Germany. So that we're talking about 1978, the Commission Nationale d'Information et Liberté, CNIL, is the data protection authority in France. And from there came also, slowly but surely, the Data Protection Directive of 1995 that is currently in use, but we're moving to the GDPR's enforcement in May of this year.
So do you see, I guess, European countries as kind of setting almost an example for the rest of the world when it comes to privacy, mainly because the magnitude of the lessons learned about how data was used in World War II?
Well, I think Europe evolved from this Charter of 1948, so this Declaration of Human Rights, to land on a charter that was agreed upon, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which sets out a list of rights for individuals. This kind of stems the basis for what the GDPR, but also e-privacy is going to be about. So we learned the lessons from the past, obviously, to make sure that we build sustainable societies in the long term, based also on the rule of law, because this is our values and this is what we want to protect and make sure we build towards. As our society are also being more digitalized one way or another, so we're trying to figure out what that means. And in that sense, the GDPR is a stepstone towards building something else, hopefully not only for Europe. So there's an extraterritorial scope to the GDPR as well. It's about protecting the rights of data subjects who are in the Union. So it's not just about European citizens, but it's about people who are in the Union, and hopefully being able to export this one way or another as well through what's called the Convention 108 on data protection.
And you've mentioned previously that there's quite a number of countries that are signatory to that, or soon to be.
Yes, so slowly but surely more and more countries understand that respecting data subjects' rights is important to assure that these values upon which societies are based are also respected and built towards growth, economic growth, but also well-being in general for individuals. So currently 51 countries have signed the convention, and every couple of months or every year there's a new country that aligns to that. This idea of export of the GDPR also finds itself, for example, related to Japan. Japan recently updated their privacy legislation. It's pretty close to the GDPR, So data transfers between Japan and Europe, once they get to this level of adequacy, which allows for countries to export data between themselves, once they get there and the European Commission agrees on this, will help foster data transfers between different countries, because we recognize that data is the basis for evolutions of our societies, growth partially, but there's probably more to that as well. So I think what the GDPR tries to do is build an accountability framework for the actors within the data ecosystem, to foster what's also called the digital single market within Europe. We want free data flows one way or another, but we want a good balance between what companies want, what citizens want, and what the law can provide in terms of support and redress mechanisms.
I'm going to throw out a really controversial question because that's my favourite type of questions.
That's surprising.
I've heard a few people mention, and I don't share this view, that GDPR or particularly stringent privacy legislation can be anti-business. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that anti-business and this idea of there is an obligation or a fiduciary duty of companies to assure maximization of profits doesn't always work on the long term. And, in analytics, we always talk about the fact that what counts, what's being measured actually counts. There are certain things that are not being measured. And one of these examples is global warming. And so I think we need to move beyond these short-term visions of optimization, profit maximization, to assure that we build for the long term, because there are consequences to what's happening, and we're all trying to figure out what all this data commodification actually means for our societies and for the individuals within society. So it's kind of more of a short-term versus long-term vision. What do we want for us, but also for our children and the generations after us?
That's something I give a lot of thought to. I mean, even within my own lifetime, I think about all of the data that exists on me, and for our children, it's obviously going to be exponentially more. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts a little bit. That there's some discussions floating around. Everyone seems to be talking about machine learning at the moment. It's like the year of 2018 is a year of machine learning. And some concepts around how, if you build an algorithm that favors showing certain content to women or men, and I mean that's just one of the ways that data can get used. I mean, how do you balance that, the desire of those algorithms to match people to the right things without discrimination?
I think that's where we go back to the roots of statistics. It's what I studied initially, and I was always surprised when I got into digital that this idea of representativity of the population wasn't really there. You didn't really test anything, you just measured and found some form of correlation, and they then take decisions based on that. And I think today the GDPR is going to address the accountability issue so that people do the right thing. My big question will be about, before we take decisions based on data, how can we assure we also manage the obligation of seeing that these data populations are non-biased, actually? Before I start deciding that that person gets a credit or gets access to health insurance, how do I make sure that that person is not being discriminated against because they are blonde, because gender, because of race, or things like that? So for the moment, I think we're going to clean up data flows one way or another. Next step will probably be make sure that there is no bias within the data, so that machine learning can bring positive changes and not too many false positives or negative backlashes. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a huge thank you, Aurélie, for coming along and speaking with me today. If any of our listeners are interested in discussing privacy further, I'm always keen to chat about this. Aurélie has literally just added her application to Slack, so she'll be on Measure Slack. And as always, you can tweet us at Analytics Hour. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you for having me. Have a nice day.